Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
All right, I am very happy to have Dimitri Masin, CEO, co-founder at Gradient Labs. Welcome aboard.
Happy to be here, Joe. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this. There's a lot to discuss today. There's so many cool things that I think that I've seen about your organization, what you're working on, that I think is really important. That it's a discussion that I have not had too much of recently, but is very important. So the bigger picture is, while AI-powered customer service isn't new, regulated industries have been there and it's sometimes left behind due to strict compliance requirements and high cost of mistakes. So AI customer service agents they have the possibility of achieving 80 to 90% resolution rates at huge cost savings. I've seen 75% cost savings and even 98% quality assurance pass rate. So compared to, I guess, 90% of humans. So outperforming both human agents and traditional bots. So that's sort of what we hope to discuss today. I'd love to understand a little bit more about what helped you and your co-founders come together and build this out at Gradient Labs. So what's sort of your story behind all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, all three of us are all ex-Monzo. Monzo is the largest neobank in the UK, similar to Chime in the US, I guess. And I joined Monzo personally as employee number 30 around that time, so quite early on to lead all things data science, machine learning, data engineering, and so on. And both of my co-founders have joined the team very early on. And towards the end, I was actually leading quite a large team across the whole bank of 120 people or so. So it was really kind of that time that shaped our experience working in a bank, but also the tech company, right? Because Monzo was actually a very interesting case because obviously it is a bank, but obviously it's also a tech company. And I think that made you rethink how you approach certain regulatory requirements of how you approach certain tech from a different angle, because you kind of needed to combine always both. And that's where our DNA came from, right? So we essentially said, look, you can actually do both. You don't need to kind of to shy away from compliance and regulatory angles. Yes, it is difficult, it is hard, but ultimately with technology, you can do them in many cases a lot better. That's kind of our backstory, like why we're building AI automation in the sort of regulated space. And obviously throughout time at Monzo, all three of us were working predominantly within operations and customer support departments, because that's where the biggest opportunity areas for data science has been.
Really interesting. So could you give a little history or a little bit of background about the organization itself and what it does?
Yeah, so Gradient Labs automates customer support end-to-end completely without humans in the loop for, let's call it, complex and high-stakes environments. And predominantly it's financial services right now. But in general, the technology that we've built would apply to any industry really. But what we have seen so far is that our platform resonates with banks and financial services in particularly because it comes right out of the box with all the things that they need to consider or they need to think about from a kind of compliance and regulatory angle.
Very interesting. So does that include agents that are fully dynamic and autonomous in the sense that you have voice interaction, but probably chat interactions, things like that as well? Is that all part of the package?
Yes, well, not voice at the moment. So I think one of the key selling proposition, well, in particular because we are focusing on compliance or like high stakes risk averse areas, is that we need to be able to guarantee quality, right? So essentially our only way to sell into those organizations say, look, we can promise you much better quality than what you currently get from your human teams. And that's how we are able to sell into those. And I'm happy to dive much deeper into that topic. But on the voice front, where the technology seems to be there already, it seems to be working great on the surface and very fast and very natural. I think it's hard to guarantee quality like we can on the text, i.e. chat and email side. So therefore, we do only chat and emails for now. But I think 1 year, 2 years down the line, voice will be a core component of it as well.
This is fascinating because I used to be in this space myself many moons ago, and just like tangibly working with customers and with groups of people that were interacting with customers, customer facing and responding and all of these things. And it always seemed like it was something that was eventually going to be possible to do. But how do you, without, giving away all of
Yeah,
the special
yeah,
sauce, how do
yeah.
you go about making sure that the information that's being given to the customer, your client, is at that high rate? Like, how is that possible? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm curious.
I think without diving into or boring you with too much detail, but let me try. I think they are like different components of things that you would care about. So at the bottom, like the most foundational element is just factual correctness, right? So you, in general, don't want to make up stuff. But this is generally solved with techniques like RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And that's not a particularly difficult product. And companies are solving it by basing the replies on their knowledge base or historical answers or something like this. But what we have found in our journey is that this is kind of very much table stakes. Many companies can do that. There are tools out there. What really, really matters, though, or like how you bring the quality to human level or superhuman quality even, is by really building in the capability of understanding what the customer is talking about. Because most of those systems that are trying to automate customer support, the way they work is they copy what the customer is saying, they find similar documents, and they try to produce the answer
Yes.
based on the assumption that the answer is somewhere there. But what we have found is actually much harder to know when you should not be when you should not be replying, because like in financial services, if somebody talks about something sensitive like fraud or like being scammed, it's actually much harder to know when you should not reply versus what to reply from a document. So that's a very important problem to be solving. And in order to solve that problem, knowing not when not to reply, you kind of need to understand the context. You can't just say, "Oh, just give me all the documents that kind of look similar, and I will produce a reply." You really need to say, "Okay, I now get what the customer is hinting at, or what they actually want," because in many cases you also can't take things at face value. Like customer might say one thing but actually mean something else. So really, this contextual understanding and being able to have a helpful conversation is what goes beyond the factual correctness, and that's what kind of really drives the customer to satisfaction and quality of interaction.
Fascinating. So did a lot of this stuff start happening prior to sort of the transformer or the LLM models, or it sort of rapidly changed the dynamic of how you all have built things since that sort of became mainstream?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in our case, we tried for years, even before we started Gradient Labs at Monzo back then, automating customer support with various successes, some successful projects, some not. And like, I'm going to give you an anecdote. Like every machine learning team has this idea. It's like, what if we suggest a reply to the customer support agent? Surely it will make them much faster and better. Obviously, we did that as well. For various reasons, actually, that is not a great idea, because what you will see is that maybe the productivity improves by 3% or maximum 5%. And then you will ask yourself, what is wrong? Why is that? And what we found out back then is that it actually takes people longer to read the suggested response, as opposed to just do slash the limit increase shortcut for a particular answer that they know exactly what will be there. And this is just an example, right? This is just an anecdote, but essentially, it's actually very difficult to automate customer support if you try to improve the productivity of agents. That's why we were betting on end-to-end automation in general.
Really, really amazing. So when you start thinking about like the compliance aspect of it, and especially as compliance differs depending on which jurisdiction around the world you're living in or you're operating in, how how do you go about baking all of that into these types of models, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, we're actually not baking it into the models, right? So we use the models as like foundational building block of our applications. But I think what's really important here is to first even understand what those requirements are, right? Because if you have never encountered those, or if you don't know what governance means or what what governance teams want to achieve, what their end goal is, or what risk management is, it's very, very hard to solve problems for financial institutions. So it's less about building it into the model, but it's understanding those problems, but then creating holistic product experiences that take those requirements into consideration. And I'm happy to go much deeper and specific examples of that.
Yeah, if you throw out an example, that'd be great. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So for example, if you look at like a UK bank, right? So they're regulated by the FCA, and they would care about certain financial outcomes or customer outcomes. So for example, they would say you're not allowed to give financial advice if you don't have the license for this, or you need to be able to detect vulnerable customers and treat them in a particular way, or you need to be able to detect complaints, even if people don't say I want to complain explicitly, but if in a particular way they say something that indicates that they're very unsatisfied with the service. And so those are very specific requirements that FCA puts on regulated entities, right? And what we do essentially, because we know what those are, we can out of the box provide that capability in our product. So whenever we onboard a customer, we say, look, we will detect vulnerable customers, probably better than the human teams right now. We will prevent financial advice. We will detect complaints and so on. So those are like very specific examples of things that our product needs to deliver out of the box.
Wow. Okay. So I'm assuming that there's some sort of learning loop such that everything is being sort of gathered at the same time. So whether the individual's working in chat or emails, if the reply from the customer is, no, that it's constantly feeding back into that system and it'll eventually, I'm assuming, be multimodal because they're going to be using audio, or maybe they're using audio to sort of capture that now. So eventually when you do leverage some of that, that will be available.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. Multimodal is already today, right? So that's the world we're living in. Oh, sorry. When I say this, I mean text and image.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Voice in the future, but you touch on kind of the feedback loop. That's absolutely a core component of it, because the reason why we can offer a product that works at a superhuman level is because we actually can gather signals from many customers. So we have a central mechanism, a central brain that can identify vulnerable customers, for example, just to take that example through. But our customers can review conversations and can flag conversations where our agent did it not in a good way. So we can gather that data of bad cases where our agent did a particular bad job, and can over time build evaluation data sets to really kind of be able to nail that identification of vulnerable customers and make it really kind of close to perfect over time. And I think what we have learned here, and that was a very surprising insight actually once we started working with regulated companies, is that the identification of vulnerable customers, as an example, is actually a very hard job to teach to a human, because you hire thousands of people, potentially very junior people, and teaching all of them to detect vulnerability signals is actually not easy from a change management perspective. So what we have found, actually AI can do it a much higher degree of consistency and quality, such that now companies say, actually, can you do it for all our conversations, not only the ones that you are handling, such that we don't rely on humans actually know the definition of that, because you can predict it much better.
So I think most people would agree that it makes sense to move to a time and a space and a technology that allows for the better servicing of customers or clients, right? Or whatever they're doing, whatever they're working on, that's a perfect world. But at the same time, we have to weigh these ideas that I know I used to work with huge call centers in different parts of the world, whether it was in the Philippines or in India or in the US, wherever it may be. And these types of technologies will have an impact on roles. How do you see the short term? And then I'd love to see what you would think of as a long-term view of how this one, in the beginning, of course, it's sort of like an augmented intelligence. It sort of helps people be more efficient and all that. But as you move further out, and you actually have voice interactions, which I've done so many times, I think a lot of people are doing much more of that these days. And it's fairly effective. I've seen some amazing applications of it with one of my web hosters that I work with. Uh, Whatever, it's off the charts in terms of how far they've gone with some of these things. But what does the future look like for this in the next, let's say, 2 years versus, I know this is difficult, maybe 4 years out, 5 years out. What
Yeah.
does it look like to you?
Yeah. I mean, there are probably lots of different aspects. So that's a question which we could talk about probably for an hour alone. But I can throw in a couple of interesting thoughts. I think like one interesting observation that we're seeing, like whenever customers interact with agents today, the first thing they say, "Can I talk to a human?"
Right.
Right. So, and that's because that's the baseline, right? So everyone is just used to such a bad bot and experience, and like those bots being so useless that the first thing they say, just give me a human. But actually what we're seeing right now, the newer generation of AI agents actually can perform at least on par or even sometimes better quality, right? So I think that will change. I think at some point customer will say, just give me an AI agent, because they will be able to resolve it much quicker and with high degree of certainty. Because if you have, by the way, a complex company, it's very, very difficult for one person to know everything about that bank or company or whatever the company is. For an AI agent, it's actually possible to know everything, every single detail about the company. That's how you can create a much better, much more accurate experiences. So that's one thing. I think, like the shift from give me a human to give me an AI agent.
Huge difference. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's my prediction, right? But maybe like,
I love it.
yeah. I think another thing that's a topic very close to my heart is, I think most people are underestimating how quickly the adoption will happen with that technology and how big of a societal change it will result in particular, not only in customer service, because that's just like a small aspect of our life, but also like what we are doing right now is automating general human intelligence, right? So, and also the physical work that humans are doing. So I think what we are really kind of, what I don't see enough discussion on is like what will happen if like large parts of the world will start be displaced in terms of jobs by AI, and not enough new jobs are being created. And I think that's a topic very close to my heart, and I don't think people are discussing it too rigorously, because it's usually right now you're like either AI optimist camp or AI pessimist.
Right.
And there's nothing in the middle that is actually productive, that is needed to say, yes, AI is coming, but also what do we do if it displaces millions of jobs? What does the world need to look like then?
I am 100% on the same page with you, and I spend too much time trying to promote that in particular because I think that you're right. The two spectrums are wild, and I used to be of the optimist sentiment for the last 10 years, whatever, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was talking about AI and how important this was going to be, and people would tend to roll their eyes, saying, "Oh, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to affect my job, my company. What are you talking about?" And I was like, we'll see. We'll see. I didn't know. I
Yeah.
played around with tools, I messed around with some of these things, and it seemed to be like, wow, we're on a basic trajectory that could have an impact on us. And now it's clear as all day. So,
Yeah.
right, what's going to happen in the middle? We're certainly not going to solve that now. But maybe one other question before I'll sort of turn it over to you and see if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about. And that is, another area that I'm spending a lot of time on is sort of agentic platforms. And I'd love to see if there's a thought that you have around this. Maybe your area is a specific niche and it's like, okay, or niche, whatever you want to say, a specific spot that like, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have these pull off the shelf agents that then the customer or client can then plug and play, or maybe it does make sense. And then there's other philosophies where it's almost like an app store, right? Where people can go to and they can, and it's much more like, I'm not going to call it open source, but you can think of an open source versus a closed source model. Is that something that people are talking about in both within your organization and beyond that you've seen?
Yeah. I think most of the discussion, maybe it's slightly different framing, but please do let me know if it doesn't match up, is what I'm seeing is like companies thinking about, are we building lots of AI agents? ourselves? Like, do we need a platform? Do we need the capability to build our own AI agents? Because that's what the common thing in machine learning world, right? So you are building machine learnings, which were like models, which were very specific to your company. And then there's another school of thought, which is essentially saying, no, I just want to have like an access to a brain via an API. I don't want to build and manage an army of agents. And I think the example that I make here to people is like, it's actually, if you think about it, what we're building right now, like even our support automation brain or AI agent, it's actually the same for every company we are working with. So it's not a bespoke trained model. The only thing that changes is it's kind of the inputs, i.e. the processes that it's supposed to follow, or like the knowledge base. So if you assume that that's the correct premise, so that's actually the right mental model to think about it, then I would say, if you need the central thing to be really, really good and you can power all companies, then like if you try to build it inside the company, clearly it just doesn't make sense, right? Because you can build it central, it's general purpose. And the comparison I make here, it's like, it would be the same as building your own university and maintaining and running it just to hire fresh grads out of it. Because for humans, it's the same stuff, right? So you just hire smart people onto your teams, and the same people could go into any company. So, and I think that's where I see the biggest kind of differences in how companies think about it. It's like, oh, are we going to build an army of agents and we need a platform to host those? Or it's like, oh, are we just going to plug into an AI brain that's going to have the knowledge for us how to work on customer support, essentially like mimicking a human on your team.
Right.
That is kind of a lot more general, versatile and general purpose rather than like specific AI agents for different purposes.
Yeah. Thought-provoking. My goodness. All right. Last thing is there anything that you wanted to mention or you'd like to talk about?
I think it was a fascinating conversation, to be honest. I think I would love to see the world talking a bit more about the implication of AI. And as there are just so many topics, like the disinformation is particular, the topic that I'm like, I guess not excited about, or not, but fascinated about, like scared about a little bit almost.
Yes, yes.
And I think there's a lot of thought to be done in terms of the manipulation of minds and humans and societies, and that's certainly a topic of mine. But we certainly don't need to talk about it today.
No, I mean that's been going on for generations, right? And it's just a different form, but it's also a much faster form, which makes it all the more challenging. But I well, Dimitri, thank you so much for your time today. I think it was absolutely fascinating to hear your thoughts about what you all are working on at Gradient Labs. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. It was a pleasure as well.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.